The silence that followed Sora's declaration stretched across the battlefield like a held breath, broken only by the distant sounds of fires burning and ships dying in the void above. Commander Kethrix stared at the child, who had just defied everything his species believed. His compound eyes unreadable, his mandibles still for once. "Your emotions are meaningless," he said finally. "Sentiment cannot override genetic law. Then your law is incomplete." A new voice, said Captain Torvin, stepped forward from the ranks of Velkari soldiers, his ceremonial armor marking him as a veteran of 50 campaigns and his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had earned the right to speak. "Captain, return to your position," Kethrix ordered. "With respect, Commander." "I will not." A ripple of shock passed through the Velkari forces. Soldiers exchanging glances that would have been invisible to human eyes, but spoke volumes to their own kind. "You would commit insubordination for this creature?" Kethrix demanded. "I would commit many things for the truth," Torvin replied. "And I have seen truths today that our collective has spent millennia denying." He gestured at the ruined colony around them, at the bodies of humans who had died, rather than surrender a child who was not even their own species. "I have served alongside humans for 12 years in joint operations. I have watched them sacrifice themselves for strangers. I have seen them adopt orphans from species that would have let them die. I have never understood it until now." "Understanding is not required," Kethrix said. "Only obedience." "Obedience to what?" "A system that murders children for being born at the wrong time. A law that says love is irrelevant and choice is forbidden." Torvin turned to face the other Velkari soldiers, many of whom he had trained and led into battle. "Look at this human," he said, pointing at Deho. "He is wounded, outnumbered, facing certain defeat, and still he does not surrender. Still he fights for a child that shares none of his genetic material. Because he is irrational. Because he is a father," Torvin corrected. "Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. And that choice means more than anything the collective has ever offered." Another soldier stepped forward. Then another, then a dozen more. They did not raise their weapons against their own kind. But they did not move to enforce the commander's orders, either. They simply stood, waiting, watching, questioning everything they had been taught in orbit. Fleet Commander Sylvan observed the standoff through the tactical feeds and felt the foundations of her worldview tremble. She had commanded this fleet for over 2 centuries, had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds and enforced collective law without hesitation. But she had never seen her own soldiers doubt before. "Commander," her communications officer reported, "we are receiving transmissions from across the fleet. Multiple captains are requesting clarification on our orders. Our orders are clear. With respect. Many are questioning whether the orders remain appropriate given the circumstances." Sylvan looked at the image of the child still being broadcast across all channels, at the human who knelt beside her refusing to break despite everything, at the soldiers below who had stopped fighting for the first time in their lives. She was old enough to remember the time before the current genetic laws, before the caste system had become absolute, before children like Sora had been classified as defects to be eliminated. She remembered that the collective had once been different, that choice and emotion had once been valued alongside lineage and duty. "Fleet Commander," her second-in-command said quietly, "if we press this attack, we may win the battle but lose something far more important." "What would we lose?" "Certainty. Our soldiers have seen something today that cannot be unseen. This child, this human, this impossible family. They have planted questions that will grow regardless of what we do here." Sylvan closed her eyes, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders when she opened them again. Her decision was made. "All forces, stand down," she ordered. "Prepare for withdrawal." "Commander?" "The asset retrieval operation is cancelled. We are returning to collective space on the surface. Kethrix received the order with visible shock. Fleet Commander, the mission is nearly complete. We have the child. You have nothing. Commander, release the prisoners. Release the child. We are leaving. But the law will be reviewed by the High Council. This situation has become more complex than a simple retrieval operation. We will return when we have answers to questions that should have been asked long ago. Kethrix stood frozen for a long moment, his entire worldview collapsing around him. Then he made a gesture, and the soldiers holding Deho released their grip. This is not over, he said to the human. No, Deho agreed, rising painfully to his feet. But for today, it is enough. The Valkyrie withdrew in perfect formation, their discipline holding even as everything else crumbled. They left behind a ruined colony and a traumatized population, and questions that would echo through their civilization for generations. And they left behind a father and daughter, holding each other in the ashes of their home, alive against all odds. The cost had been terrible. Over 100 human ships destroyed, their crews lost to the void, dozens of colonists dead in the streets they had defended, buildings burned, fields scorched, a community shattered by violence it had never asked for. But New Gyeonggi would rebuild, as humans always rebuilt, with the stubborn determination that made them unique among the stars. The volunteers who had survived stayed to help, their battered ships becoming cargo haulers again as supplies poured in from across human space. The story of Sora and Deho spread, carried by journalists and travelers and soldiers returning home, until it became something larger than itself, a legend about what family truly meant, a reminder that love was not weakness but strength, a warning to anyone who thought they could threaten a human's child without consequence. Months later, when the colony had begun to heal, Sora sat with her father on the porch of their rebuilt house and watched ships pass through the evening sky. Will they come back? She asked. I do not know, Deho admitted. The reports say there is debate within the collective. Some want to try again while others think the whole system needs to change. Because of what I said. Because of what you are. Living proof that their beliefs are wrong. That genetics do not determine destiny. That choice can overcome programming. Sora was quiet for a while, processing this appa. She said finally, if they do come back, will you fight for me again? Deho looked at his daughter, this impossible child who had fallen into his life like a gift and transformed everything she touched. I will never stop fighting for you, he said. Not as long as I breathe, not as long as there is strength in my body, not as long as there is love in my heart. Even though I am not human? Even though we share no blood? Sora, blood is an accident. Family is a choice. And I chose you the moment I saw you in that escape pod. I will keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life. She leaned against him. This strange, soft creature who had become her entire world, and finally understood what the Valkyrie could not. Family was not genetics or law or duty. Family was the person who stood between you and the darkness. Even when the darkness had 40 warships, family was the one who chose you when no one else would. Family was love made visible, made real, made unbreakable by the simple act of showing up every single day. And she would never let go of that. No matter what the universe threw at them next, above the peaceful fields of New Gyeonggi, the stars shone cold and distant, full of threats and wonders and possibilities beyond counting. But on that porch, in that moment, a human and his Valkyrie daughter watched the sky together, father and child, family by choice, unbroken and unafraid. The human ships burned in the darkness of space, their hulls torn apart by weapons they could not match, their crews dying for a cause they had chosen freely. Captain Park Yoonji commanded the defense from the bridge of the Morning Star. her voice steady as she ordered maneuvers that bought seconds instead of minutes. Concentrate fire on their fighter screens. She shouted over the alarms. We cannot hurt the big ships, but we can make them pay for every meter. The civilian fleet fought with desperation and creativity, using tactics that no military academy would have approved. Cargo vessels loaded with mining explosives rammed into Valkyrie destroyers, their crews ejecting at the last moment if they were lucky and dying at their posts if they were not. Transport ships used their heavy shielding to absorb fire meant for smaller vessels, sacrificing themselves so that others could strike back. Mining tugs wrapped grappling cables around enemy fighters and dragged them into collisions with their own fleet. None of it was enough. The Valkyrie were too disciplined, too numerous, too powerful for every enemy ship that fell. 10 human vessels were destroyed, and the gap in their defensive line grew wider with each passing hour on the surface. Deho listened to the casualty reports and felt each one like a wound in his own flesh. Ground forces are landing. Someone reported, 6 dropships in the eastern fields. Move the civilians to the secondary shelters, Deho ordered. All combat personnel to defensive positions. He picked up a rifle he had not fired in years and walked out to meet the invaders. The Valkyrie ground troops were elite soldiers, bred for combat and trained from birth to fight without fear or hesitation. They moved through the colony with mechanical precision, their weapons cutting down anyone foolish enough to stand against them. But the humans did not run farmers who had spent their lives growing food, stood in their fields with hunting rifles and improvised explosives. Shop owners defended their stores with whatever they could find. Teachers formed lines in front of shelters full of children and refused to move. They died, many of them. But they made the Valkyrie pay for every building and every street. Deho fought at the front of the defense, his military training returning in flashes of muscle memory as he directed fire and rallied retreating colonists. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. He tried to rise, but 2 Valkyrie soldiers were on him before he could move, their clawed hands pinning him down as a third secured his weapon. Commander Kang Deho, a cold voice said through a translator. You have caused the collective considerable trouble. He looked up at Commander Kethrix, the leader of the ground forces, whose ceremonial armor was splashed with human blood. Where is the child? Kethrix demanded. Deho spat at the Valkyrie's feet. Safe from you. Nothing is safe from the collective. You know this. You have always known this. Your resistance was admirable, but ultimately meaningless. The commander gestured, and his soldiers hauled Deho upright, keeping him restrained as more troops swept through the colony. Reports crackled through the Valkyrie communication network. Squads clearing buildings and capturing prisoners. The systematic dismantling of everything Deho had built. We have located the child shelter, someone announced. Secure it. Bring the asset to me unharmed. Sora was in the bunker with 30 other children, huddled in a corner, while the adults who were supposed to protect them lay dead or dying at the entrance. She had watched the battle on a cracked display screen, seen human ships explode in the void, seen her neighbors cut down in the streets, and she had seen her father fall. The bunker door exploded inward, and Valkyrie soldiers poured through the opening, their weapons tracking across the terrified children until they found their target. Anomaly 773, the squad leader announced. You will come with us. Sora stood slowly, her legs trembling, her compound eyes fixed on the soldiers who had come to claim her. My name is Sora, she said. Your designation is irrelevant. You are property of House Velkai, and you will be returned to collective custody. They led her through the ruined streets of the only home she had ever known, past bodies in burning buildings and the scattered remains of a community that had welcomed her. Without question, she did not cry. Though she wanted to, she did not beg. Though she was terrified, She walked with her head high because her father had taught her that dignity was something no one could take away. Commander Kethrix was waiting in the colony's central square. Surrounded by his soldiers and their prisoners, Deho knelt in the front row, his shoulder bleeding and his face bruised. But his eyes never left Sora as they brought her forward. "The asset has been secured," the squad leader reported. Kethrix examined Sora with the clinical interest of someone inspecting merchandise. "You have been corrupted by human influence," he observed. "Your posture is wrong. Your mannerisms are alien. You do not even know how to stand properly." "I know how to stand," Sora replied. "I am standing right now. Insolence will be corrected. Your re-education will begin immediately upon your return to the homeworld. Within a generation, the contamination will be purged from your lineage. I do not want to go to the homeworld. What you want is irrelevant. You are property. You belong to the collective. Your genetic material belongs to House Velkai." Sora looked at her father, at this strange soft creature who had found her in the void and chosen to love her when no one else would. Deho's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not defeat but defiance, not surrender but strength. "You are wrong," she said to Kethrix. "About what?" "About everything." She pulled away from the soldiers holding her and pointed at the bleeding, battered human who knelt in the dirt with an empire's worth of firepower arrayed against him. "You say I'm property, but I am not. You say I belong to the collective, but I do not. You say my genetics define my destiny, but they do not." Kethrix's mandibles clicked with impatience. "Child, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," Sora said, her voice rising with an emotion that the translator struggled to convey. She turned to face the gathered soldiers and prisoners, the humans who had fought and the Volcari who had conquered, and she screamed with all the fury her young body could produce, "You are not my real dad." She pointed at Kethrix, at the soldiers, at the ship still visible in the darkening sky. Then she pointed at Deho. "He is. He found me when I was nothing. He saved me when your law said I should die. He raised me and taught me and loved me when your entire species threw me away like garbage." Tears streamed from her compound eyes, a biological response she had learned from humans because Valkyrie were not supposed to cry. "You want to talk about lineage? About blood? About what makes a family?" She walked to her father and knelt beside him, taking his hand in her small clawed fingers. "This is my father. This is my family, and I choose him. I will always choose him. And nothing you do will ever change that." The broadcast went out across all channels, transmitted by a dying human ship that used its last power to make sure the galaxy heard a child's voice, declaring her love for the only family she had ever known, an empire's certainty. Cracking under the weight of an emotion they had no word for, and in orbit above New Geongi, Fleet Commander Sylvan watched the footage and felt something stir in the depths of her ancient mind that she had not experienced in centuries. Doubt. The first ship arrived 2 days after Deho's message went out. A battered freighter called the Morning Star that had been hauling agricultural supplies between colony worlds. Its captain was a woman named Park Yunji, who had served in the human navy 30 years ago and had been looking for a reason to fight ever since heard you needed some help. She said when Deho met her at the landing pad, "I did not expect anyone to actually come." Then, you do not know humans very well. More ships came. They arrived in 1s and 2s at first, then in groups of 5 and 10. Emerging from hyperspace with messages of support and cargo holds, full of weapons and supplies, mining vessels from the asteroid belts, their hulls reinforced for impacts, and their res crews hardened by years of dangerous work. Transport ships, converted into makeshift gunboats by engineers who had learned their trade in wars that humanity wanted to forget. Personal yachts belonging to wealthy citizens who had heard the call and decided that some things mattered more than comfort within 4 days. Over 200 vessels had gathered in orbit around New Jiangdi, a ragtag fleet of civilian ships crewed by farmers and miners and merchants who had never trained for combat. Governor Yun watched the gathering armada from her office window, her expression caught between hope and despair. "This is madness," she said to Deho. "These people are going to get themselves killed. They know the risks. Do they? Do they really understand what they are facing?" As if to answer her question, the Valkyrie fleet arrived at the edge of the system, 40 warships in perfect formation, their angular hulls bristling with weapons that could turn the human fleet to debris in minutes. The flagship alone was larger than all the human vessels combined, a dreadnought named Absolute Law that had ended rebellions and crushed resistance across 100 worlds. Deho counted the ships on his display and felt his courage waver. "For the first time since this began, maybe we should negotiate," Governor Yun said quietly. "They do not want to negotiate. They want Sora. Would it really be so terrible? She would be royalty among them. She would have power and privilege, and she would be a prisoner, a breeding asset, a piece of property to be used and discarded when her genetic value was exhausted." Yun fell silent because she knew he was right on the surface of New Jiangdi. The colonists prepared for war, farmers who had never held anything more dangerous than harvesting tools learned to fire weapons and dig defensive positions. Engineers rigged the colony's infrastructure with traps and surprises for any ground forces that might land. Teachers organized evacuation routes for children and elderly residents who could not fight, and in the middle of it all, Sora struggled to understand what was happening around her. She had always known she was different, had always felt the gap between herself and the human children who were her friends. But she had never truly grasped what that difference meant. Now she watched news feeds from other worlds, saw images of Valkyrie children standing in perfect rows with blank expressions, heard translations of speeches about genetic purity and caste duty and the sacred obligations of lineage. "Is that what I was supposed to be?" she asked her father one evening. "That is what they wanted you to be. But I'm not like them. I do not think like them." "No, you do not. Does that mean something is wrong with me?" Deho knelt to meet her eyes, taking her small clawed hands in his larger human ones. "There is nothing wrong with you, Sora. You are exactly who you are supposed to be. Then why do they want me so badly?" "Because they cannot understand what you have become. You are proof that their entire system is built on lies, and that terrifies them." The Valkyrie commander broadcast her ultimatum on the 6th day, her image appearing on every screen, and the colony fleet commander Sylvan was ancient by Valkyrie standards. Her chitin faded to a gray that spoke of centuries of service, and her compound eyes held the cold certainty of absolute faith. "Humans of New Jiangdi," her translator announced, "you have gathered to oppose the lawful recovery of collective property. This is foolish and will result in your destruction. Surrender the child designated 773, and your lives will be spared. Resist, and you will be eliminated." She paused, her mandibles clicking in a pattern that suggested she was choosing her next words carefully. "We do not wish to harm you, but we will not be denied what is ours. You have 12 hours to comply." The transmission ended, and silence fell across the colony. Deho walked through the streets that night, past neighbors who nodded grimly and strangers who had come from distant stars to stand with him. He found Captain Park Yoonji in a makeshift command center, coordinating the civilian fleet with the rough efficiency of someone who had done this before. "What are our chances?" he asked. "Honestly, almost zero. Their ships are faster, stronger, and better armed, and they have 40 years of tactical doctrine developed specifically for situations like this. Then why are you here?" Yoonji smiled, a fierce expression that belonged on a warrior's face. because some things are worth dying for. Commander, because there is a little girl down there who needs to know that she matters. Because the universe should see what humans do when someone threatens one of our children. She is not human. She is yours. That makes her ours. Daiho returned home as dawn broke over the colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed too beautiful for a day that might end in fire. Sora was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. "You did not sleep," she said. "Neither did you." They sat together in silence, watching the light spread across the fields they had worked, and the town they had built, and the life they had made in defiance of everything the universe said was possible. "Appa," Sora said finally, "if they take me, I want you to know that I do not blame you. They are not going to take you. But if they do, I want you to know that these 7 years were worth everything. That you gave me something the collective never could have." "What is that?" "A family," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "A real family that chose to love me instead of just owning me." Daiho wrapped his arm around his daughter and held her close as the first Valkyrie ships began their descent through the atmosphere. "They will have to go through me first," he said. "I know. That is what I am afraid of." The battle for New Gyeonggi began at noon, when the human fleet moved to intercept the Valkyrie advance, and the sky filled with fire. Daiho watched from the ground command center as the ragtag armada he had summoned threw itself against an enemy they could not hope to defeat. Ships died in brilliant flashes of light, their crews giving everything for a child they had never met, and somewhere above the burning sky, Fleet Commander Sylvan watched the slaughter and wondered why these strange mammals refused to accept the inevitable. New Gyeonggi was a world of endless green fields and small towns where everyone knew their neighbors and children played in streets without fear. Kang Daiho had found peace here, or something close to it, working as the colony's security coordinator while raising his daughter in a community that had accepted them both without question. The humans of New Gyeonggi were practical people, farmers and engineers and teachers who had left the crowded core worlds to build something simpler. They did not ask why a former military commander had arrived with a Valkyrie child, and they did not treat Sora any differently than they treated their own children. She was just another kid who complained about homework and begged for extra dessert and dreamed about traveling to distant stars. Sora had grown tall for her species, her pale blue chitin now marked with the darker patterns that came with adolescence, and her compound eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. She spoke Korean fluently, with the slight accent of New Gyeonggi's farming communities, and she had learned to read human facial expressions better than most humans could read Valkyrie ones. "Appa," she called from the kitchen, using the Korean word for father that she had adopted years ago. "I need you to sign my permission slip for the field trip." Daiho looked up from his security reports and smiled. "Where is this field trip going?" "The Agricultural Research Station. We are studying crop rotation and soil analysis." "Sounds exciting." "It sounds boring. But Minjin says they have a really good cafeteria." Daiho signed the form and watched his daughter stuff it into her backpack with the careless efficiency of all children everywhere. She was happy here, he thought, truly happy in a way that the Valkyrie Collective would never have allowed her to be. He sometimes wondered about the person who had saved her, the worker who had hidden a pregnancy and launched an illegal child into space rather than watch her die. He hoped they had found some measure of peace before the end. The alarm on his communicator shattered the morning calm with 3 sharp tones that meant priority alert. Daiho read the message twice, his face going pale. "What is wrong?" Sora asked, suddenly alert to the change in his posture. "Nothing," he lied. "I just need to go to the office early today. Make sure you catch the transport to school." He kissed her forehead and left before she could ask more questions. his heart pounding as he drove through the quiet streets toward the colony's administrative center. Governor Yu Mei was waiting for him in her office, her expression grave. "You have seen the report?" she asked. "Valkyrie diplomatic vessel entered the system 2 hours ago, requesting permission to land." "They are not requesting, Deho. They are informing. And they have asked specifically to meet with you." His blood turned to ice. "They know she is here. They have known for some time. Apparently, they were just waiting for the right moment. What do they want?" "They would not say, but I think we both know." The Valkyrie vessel landed outside the colony's main settlement, its angular design a stark contrast to the curved organic architecture that humans preferred. 3 figures emerged, tall and imposing in their ceremonial robes, their compound eyes scanning the gathered crowd of curious colonists. The leader introduced himself as Ambassador Kethful of the High Council, and his translator gave his words a formal cadence that suggested great importance. "We have come to reclaim what belongs to the collective," he announced. Governor Yoon stepped forward. "This is a human colony. Ambassador, we do not recognize Valkyrie property claims here. The property we seek is not land or resources," Kethful said, turning his gaze directly to Deho. "It is a child, illegally taken from collective custody 11 years ago. She was going to be killed," Deho said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "That was then. Circumstances have changed." The ambassador produced a holographic display showing genetic data that meant nothing to the watching crowd, but made Deho's heart sink. Analysis of archive samples has revealed that the anomaly designated 773 carries markers of the prime lineage, a royal bloodline thought extinct for 3 centuries. She is no longer a defect to be eliminated, but a treasure to be reclaimed. Her name is Sora. Names given by outsiders carry no weight. She is Valkyrie. She belongs to the collective. She will be returned to assume her proper place within the hierarchy. Governor Yoon raised her hand. "Ambassador, you are asking us to surrender a child who has lived among us for 7 years, who was raised by one of our citizens, who knows no life but this one." "We are not asking," Kethful replied. "We are informing you of collective law. The child is property of House Valkyrie. Her genetic material belongs to the lineage. Her presence here is theft. She is not property," Deho said, stepping closer to the ambassador. "She is my daughter." The Valkyrie made a sound that the translator rendered as something between amusement and contempt. "You mammals and your emotional attachments. You cannot adopt a Valkyrie any more than you could adopt a piece of furniture. Biology is destiny. Lineage is law. Then your law is wrong. Your opinion is noted and irrelevant. You have 1 standard week to prepare the child for transfer. If she is not surrendered willingly, the collective will retrieve her by force." The ambassador turned and walked back to his ship without waiting for a response, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. That night, Deho sat on the porch of their small house and watched the stars while Sora did her homework inside. He had not told her yet, could not find the words to explain that the monsters from her forgotten past had finally found her. But Sora was clever, and she had noticed the Valkyrie ship in the sky, and she had heard the whispers at school about aliens coming to take someone away. She appeared in the doorway behind him. "They are here for me," she said. "Are they not?" Deho did not turn around. "Yes. What do they want?" "They say you have royal blood, that you belong to some important family, that you have to go back with them." Sora was quiet for a long moment. "I do not want to go," she said finally, her voice small. "Then you will not go." "But they said they would take me by force." Deho turned to face his daughter. This impossible child, who had fallen into his life like a gift from an uncaring universe. "Let them try," he said. Governor Yoon called an emergency meeting the next day, and the colony's leaders gathered to discuss their options. The political reality was grim. New Jongi was a small agricultural world with no military presence, no defensive capabilities, and no leverage against a species that commanded one of the largest fleets in known space. The official human government had already sent a message expressing concern but declining to intervene in what they called an internal Valkyrie matter. "We cannot fight them," someone said. "We cannot surrender a child to them either." Someone else replied. Deho stood at the back of the room, listening to people debate his daughter's fate like she was a problem to be solved. Governor Yoon finally looked at him. "What do you want to do, Deho?" "I want to keep my daughter safe, even if it means war." He thought about Sora, about bedtime stories and scraped knees and the way she laughed when he made terrible jokes. He thought about the escape pod and the child, who had been too afraid to speak, and the choice that had seemed so simple at the time. "Yes," he said, "even if it means war." The message went out that night, broadcast on frequencies that human ships monitored across the sector. A child was being threatened. A father was standing alone, and anyone who wanted to help was welcome to come. Nobody expected anyone to answer. The escape pod drifted through the darkness of space like a forgotten prayer, its emergency beacon flashing weak signals that nobody was meant to hear. Commander Kang Daeho noticed it first on his patrol ship's sensors, a tiny blip where nothing should exist, and he changed course against protocol to investigate. The research station Horizon's Edge hung in the void behind him, a joint venture between humans and 3 other species. A place of science and careful diplomacy, where everyone watched their words and measured their steps. Daeho had served there for 2 years as a military attaché, a fancy title that mostly meant he handled security concerns and broke up arguments between scientists who thought their research mattered more than anyone else's. He was tired of politics and paperwork and pretending that every species was equally reasonable, when some clearly were not. The escape pod grew larger in his viewport as he approached, its hull scarred by weapons fire and marked with symbols he recognized immediately. Valkyrie. His stomach tightened at the sight of those sharp, angular letters that looked like claw marks, frozen in metal. The Valkyrie were an insectoid species with 6 limbs and compound eyes that reflected light like shattered mirrors, and they operated their society with the cold precision of a machine. Everything in their culture revolved around caste and function and genetic purity, concepts they pursued with religious dedication. Daeho docked with the pod and cycled through the airlock with his weapon drawn, expecting to find a dead pilot or perhaps a trap. What he found instead changed everything. A child. She was small, maybe 4 years old by human developmental standards. Her chitin a pale blue color that seemed wrong somehow, different from the darker shades he had seen on adult Valkyrie. Her compound eyes were closed, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. And she was curled into a ball in the corner of the pod, like she was trying to make herself disappear. Daeho holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, his training screaming at him to maintain distance while something deeper pushed him forward. "Hey," he said softly, knowing she probably could not understand him. "You are safe now." Her eyes opened, hundreds of tiny lenses focusing on his face, and she made a sound that his translator rendered as pure terror. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall, her small limbs raised in what he recognized as a defensive posture. "I am not going to hurt you," Daeho said, keeping his voice calm and his hands visible. "I am here to help." He found the pod's data recorder and downloaded its contents to his ship, then carried the trembling child back through the airlock. She did not fight him, but she did not relax either, her body rigid with fear as he strapped her into a seat and set course back to the station. The data recorder told a story that made his blood run cold. The child was designated Anomaly 773, born outside an approved breeding cycle to a low-caste worker who had hidden the pregnancy until birth. Valkyrie law was absolute on such matters. Genetic anomalies threatened the purity of the caste system and had to be eliminated before they could contaminate the bloodlines. The child had been scheduled for termination, a clinical word for murder. But someone had put her in an escape pod and launched her into the void. Instead, a desperate act by someone who would certainly be executed for their defiance. Daeho looked at the small creature huddled in the seat beside him, her eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and something else he could not name. And he made a decision that would define the rest of his life when he arrived at the station. He did not report the child through official channels. He went instead to Dr. Young Jie, the station's human medical officer and one of the few people he trusted completely. "What have you done?" Jie asked when she saw the Valkyrie child in his arms. "I found her," Daeho said, "and I am keeping her." The doctor's examination revealed that the child was healthy despite her ordeal. Malnourished but strong, frightened but unbroken, Jie gave him a long look when she finished. The kind of look that contained entire conversations. "The Valkyrie will want her back," she said. "They want her dead. That is their law. Their law is wrong." Jie did not argue because she knew he was right, and she helped him file the paperwork under obscure human asylum provisions that nobody had invoked in decades. The Valkyrie diplomatic liaison arrived within hours, his compound eyes blazing with what Daeho had learned to recognize as anger in their species. "You have taken collective property," the liaison said, his translator giving his words a flat mechanical quality. "I have rescued a child," Daeho replied. "It is an anomaly, a genetic defect that must be corrected for the health of the whole. She is a person. Your sentiment is noted and irrelevant. The child will be returned to face proper disposition." "No." The liaison's mandibles clicked in a pattern that indicated frustration. "You do not have the authority to deny a lawful collective request. Watch me." The standoff lasted 3 days while lawyers and diplomats argued and threatened and negotiated in rooms that Daeho was not allowed to enter. He spent those days in his quarters with the child, feeding her nutrient paste that Jie had synthesized and trying to coax words from her that his translator could interpret. On the second day, she spoke. "Why?" Her small voice asked through the translator. "Why what? Why did you not let me die?" Daeho felt something crack inside his chest. A breaking that was also somehow a beginning. "Because you deserve to live," he said. "Because someone has to stand up and say that killing children is wrong. Because I looked at you and I saw someone worth saving." She did not understand. He could see that in the way her eyes moved. But she stopped trembling when he was near on the 4th day. The station commander called Daeho into her office and told him that he was being reassigned to a remote human colony called New Gyeonggi. The official reason was administrative restructuring. The real reason was that his presence had become an embarrassment, and the easiest solution was to make him someone else's problem. "You can leave the child here," the commander said. "We will find a proper resolution. She comes with me." "Commander Kang, you are making a career-ending decision. Some things matter more than careers." He packed his belongings that night while the child watched from the corner of his quarters. "We are going somewhere new," he told her. "Somewhere safe where nobody will hurt you." "What is my designation?" she asked. Daeho paused, then knelt to meet her eyes. "Your name is Sora," he said, choosing a word that meant sky in his native language. "And you are my daughter now." She did not understand what that meant. Not yet, but she let him take her hand as they walked to the transport ship. 7 years passed. 7 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and arguments about vegetables and laughter that filled a small house on festivals, and vegetables and laughter that filled a small after. that filled a small house on a quiet colony world. 7 years of Sora learning to speak Korean and making friends at school and asking questions about the universe that Daeho could not always answer. 7 years of watching the stars at night and wondering when the past would catch up with them. She was 11 years old when the Valkyrie ships appeared in the sky above New Gyeonggi, and Kang Daeho knew that the time for running had finally ended.